Good evening, and thank you so much for your time. You know, it strikes me getting 8 million people back to work from next week is going to be a really difficult task because they're going back to completely different workspaces, different sets of rules and regulations. There's so much for the average worker to deal with. There's so much for the employer to deal with. But bearing in mind that it is in everyone's interests for workplaces to be compliant from a safety point of view, are you seeing signs that employers around South Africa are really coming to the table here and making sure that workplaces are safe? Or do you have some serious concerns?
Thank you very much for having us. Indeed, there are some workplaces where there is compliance, but of course there are those that we have realized that there hasn't been a compliance in relation to the regulations and the directions. And what we have also understood is that there are workers who have got infected with COVID-19 and employers release them to go home to isolate. And now the challenge is that when they go home back to their families. They could have contracted the virus at work, but they are not sent to government institutions or areas where people that must go for isolation are expected to be attended to. Now, a person goes back home. What is the environment? Has that been established? And I think that's why Cosatu has called to the Minister of Employment and Labour to say that in the regulations and in the directions, we expect that workers should also form part of compliance officers, because we cannot solely, as workers, on the safety of our own lives and livelihoods, rely on the data that is provided only squarely by employers. And we think that workers should also form part of the compliance officers, but also we're further saying that as trade unions, we should be able to take control of that process by ensuring that if we are able to do our own screening and testing aligned with what the employers are doing, the data that we receive, we can be able to compare it with the data that employers are recording and giving to the Department of Employment and Labour. And maybe just to labor the point is that we have just had a meeting with the Department of Employment and Labour, and units in the Department of Labour were giving us a report. There is the lowest number that is recorded in the corridor of workers that compensation funds have been applied for. I think it is less than 110, if it's not 110, since workers have gone back to work at different levels. And we don't believe that that's an accurate number because, for an example, the mining industry, when it opened, we already had in one mine over 20 workers that are infected. And when you come back and you hear that mining industry has only recorded 2, and out of those 2, they only take responsibility for 1, it tells us, excuse me, that we think that the data that is being received and submitted by employers, workers will have to take responsibility also for their own lives and ensure that we have and we put systems in place that are going to ensure that the data that is received, indeed, we can verify using our own systems that it is correct.
And also, you know, as we go to lockdown level 3, we are being warned there will be outbreaks. You're concerned that perhaps the outbreaks are higher than we're hearing. Is there any other alternative but to go back to work? You know, we keep being told it's such a difficult balancing act and it's not lives or livelihood, it is both. Is there really, would you agree that the only way is to just get back to work, to call out when you don't see safety in place, but for South Africa to get back to work come Monday?
Yes,
we have to go back to work. Look, the economy is on its knees. Workers are in dire poverty. They want to go back to work, but what we are not prepared to do is for workers to go and sell their lives. They go to work to sell their labor, not their lives. But importantly, and as we always say as a federation, there is no silver bullet on this matter. All of us have to have our hands on deck. Workers have to ensure that when you enter the workplace, firstly, shop stewards, who are the first line of defense, have to ensure that in the workplaces that they are located, they are part of the workplace health and safety plans. They understand exactly how the plan is going to look like before majority of workers come to sell their labor.
Absolutely.
And ensure therefore that following that, there is compliance, that when an employer ticks a box, we can be able to say, indeed, we agree the box could be ticked or the box cannot be ticked.
Yeah.
And we are able to be active follow up. And we always say workers cannot continue to say we're stakeholders and only what we do is to hold the steak and everyone else is eating. We have to take our own responsibility for our own
It's so important what you're saying, that there has to be this agreement, because we are all in this together. It's everyone's safety. And I have to ask you about the teachers' union. All this week, we have been hearing from teachers' unions who are voicing extreme concern about whether it will be safe to go back to school. Some are going to court over the issue. You speak to education authorities and they go, we are getting there. We're going to make it work. As Cosatu, what are your concerns about teachers' union? And are you even considering at this stage telling your teachers to rather stay at home next week?
As a federation, we support the teachers on their journey as they are embarking on. Look, there is no worker, because teachers are workers. So there is no worker that must go to work when there is no guarantee of safety. We know that a person can come in with already infected, but let that be established upon arriving at work through the proper screening and testing of each and every worker and each and every child. You know, one other concern that we have as parents, as a federation, which teachers also have, is that when you go back in, now for the young ones, you know, young ones like to play. So the masks that are going to be provided by the department to our kids, by the time they finish playing, would they know which mask belong to who? And so what is it that is going to be in place to ensure that there is maximum control? Okay, because we know that you would have cases that may erupt in the process, but we think that the first thing is to ensure that everyone gets to be comfortable. This insult that is posed to teachers is uncalled for by some MECs in some provinces, labeling teachers as lazy only now during COVID, when they have never labeled teachers to be lazy. And we think that those are people that are sitting at high chairs being comfortable, that they don't have to endure the very same environment. There are schools in our own communities and in the rural areas that still do not have flushing toilets. What is it that is going to be put in place to ensure that that has changed? So we support teachers. They are going back to work. Teachers are no different from any worker in this country. And we're also saying, as much as we expect that private sector must adhere to the regulations, we expect the same from government.
Such a good point
if a private sector at Pick and Pay is found that there is a worker at Pick and Pay, as an example, who has contracted the virus, as a result, the Pick and Pay store must be closed, sanitized, deep sanitized. We expect the same in relation to government entities. Government should not be treated
must be held to the same accountable rules. You're completely right. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You make such an excellent point that the rules have to apply for government and for private sector, and that it is all going to be very different next week. Thank you very much for your time.